Hi, welcome to this edition of From Ellen's Kitchen. It's summertime and the summer vegetables in our gardens are starting to produce. If you love squash the way I do, you're enjoying those summer squash, but the heavy rains that we've had in North Carolina in the last weeks have made the squash produce fairly rapidly. So we're getting an awful lot of squash. If you can see behind me on the counter, that's just what we pulled off the plants yesterday. And we share that garden with our neighbors, which we're fortunate to do, enjoy those summer vegetables. But again, we're finding some ways to use them up. We don't want to waste the vegetables. So we're sharing them with our friends and we're enjoying some different ways of cooking them. Now, there's an old way. If you live in the South, most people here have enjoyed squash and onions for years. I have a neighbor who cooks his in bacon grease. That's not something I do because it's just not a healthy option when you're cooking squash and onions. But this recipe from Med Instead of Meds is a very simple, delicious, and healthy way of cooking squash and onions. So I'm going to share that with you today. I'm heating up our pan, and in that pan we're going to add 2 tablespoons of olive oil. For this recipe, you're going to want to have a pound each of yellow squash and zucchini squash. And you want to slice them, as I have already done, to save us a little bit of time. And you want to have a half a cup of green onions to put in your squash and onions recipe. And again, 2 tablespoons of olive oil, which I've added. And as we cook the squash and onions, we're then going to season them with just enough salt to give them a little bit of flavor. You don't want to add a lot of salt. I would say at the most a half a teaspoon. But sometimes I don't even put salt in them because they've got such a wonderful flavor without the salt. And then you want to go pretty heavy on the pepper. So we're going to season them with a little salt and pepper. So as soon as our oil heats up here, I think we're about ready. We're going to add in first nope, we're not. We're going to add in the onions first. Put our green onions in there so it's sizzling. You hear that nice sizzle that's got those onions cooking up. It's going to smell really, really good. They're nice and green and fresh. Oh my gosh, they smell really, really good. Cook them down just a couple of minutes. And then we're going to add our squash. So I'm going to add a pound of yellow squash. That was only about 3 small squash that I sliced up. Let them cook just a few minutes. We'll add our zucchini squash, which again, about 3 small zucchinis. I actually used my scale to measure them, so about a pound each. And we're going to stir them up in the onions and olive oil. They're already smelling really good. Now, while that's starting to cook, I'm going to share with you real quickly. This is a knife that you need to have in your kitchen. It's a chef's knife. Very simple. Very easy to maneuver when you're slicing vegetables. So if you put your finger here to control the blade, and you place the blade down on the cutting board, you're going to you're going to use your hands in a bear claw. You don't want to cut those fingers off when you're slicing vegetables. You're going to simply move up as you push the vegetables across the blade. Move it here a little bit. This is a staple in your kitchen if you don't have one. I'm going to add those vegetables into our pot. And again, stabilize your knife with your finger. And I'm going to cut this in half just because it's easier to cut. And just slice as you push, keeping those fingers turned under. All right, that's the last of our squash. And we're going to put those also in the pan. So while we're stirring it up, I want to talk to you a little bit about the nutritional value of squash. They are quite a tasty vegetable and quite nutritious. So they don't have a lot of fat, or they don't have any fat. They don't have a lot of calories in them. If you're counting carbohydrates like I do, a cup serving of this recipe only has about 4 grams of carbohydrates. So they're really filling without giving you a lot of unhealthy calories. The other thing, they are very high in some great vitamins and minerals, and some that are to mention. They have vitamin A, vitamin B, and vitamin C. They actually have about 32% of your daily recommended value of vitamin C in 1 cup. So they're a pretty healthy choice for vegetables in the summertime. Now that's not meaning you want to cover those with lots of fattening things. Here lately, folks have started using a lot of cheese in their squash. Not that I have anything against cheese, but that's adding some fat and calories in your squash that you really don't need, particularly to help with the flavor. So we're going to cook these down until they get nice and tender. These have a really, really nice aroma, just with that 1/2 cup of green onions, giving it a really good flavor. You see that makes a nice pan of squash and onions. I added some pepper and salt, and we will just about be ready to serve the squash up. You cannot imagine this yummy smell coming from this pan right now. What a delicious side dish for our summer meals. So I'm going to allow those to continue to cook until they're tender, and then we can serve them up with our favorite serving of chicken or fish, and with a little bit of rice or pasta. And it makes a really healthy meal and a really filling meal. So I hope you're able to pull some of your squash and use this recipe at home. You can find this recipe on the Med Instead of Meds website. As we've been covering lately, we know that it's important to eat lots of servings of fruits and vegetables, and this is just one way you can get some of those vegetables into your summer diet. So enjoy. Hope to see you soon. Have a nice afternoon. Thanks for joining me.